I'm Caroline, 35 years old, and until yesterday, my husband James thought I was just a housewife who sat around doing nothing all day. Little did he know that I secretly owned the company he worked for. For years, I endured his mockery about my lack of a real job while I built my business behind the scenes. But when he humiliated me at a dinner party in front of his work friends, something snapped. The next morning, I walked into his office as the newly announced CEO and fired him and his arrogant friends on the spot. Before I tell you how I pulled off the corporate takeover of the year drop, a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of sweet, sweet justice. I met James 8 years ago at a networking event in Boston. I had just completed my MBA from Harvard Business School with honors, and I was eager to make my mark on the business world. With my blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail and dressed in a navy blue power suit, I was confidently working the room when I bumped into him, quite literally. My champagne splashed onto his expensive tie, and after my profuse apologies, we ended up talking for hours. James was charming, ambitious, and seemed to genuinely admire my business acumen. He worked as a project manager at TechSphere Solutions, a mid-sized technology company that specialized in corporate software solutions. On paper, we were perfect for each other, both driven, career-focused, and passionate about technology and innovation. Our courtship was a whirlwind. We went from networking contacts to dating within weeks. James would bring me flowers before our dinner dates and ask thoughtful questions about my career goals. He seemed impressed by my ideas for disrupting the corporate software market, and we would stay up late discussing business strategies and market opportunities. "You have an incredible mind for business, Caroline," he once told me as we shared a bottle of wine on his balcony overlooking the city. "You see opportunities that others miss." At that time, I was working as a senior consultant for a prestigious firm, but I had also started a side project, a small tech startup focused on developing more efficient project management systems. It was just me and 2 programmers working out of my apartment on weekends, but I had big dreams for where it could go. When James proposed a year later, I felt like I had found a true partner, someone who respected my intelligence and ambition as much as he cared for me personally. We were married in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by friends and family, all of whom commented on what a power couple we made. The first 2 years of our marriage were everything I had hoped for. We supported each other's careers and celebrated each other's wins. When my little side business began to gain traction with a few small clients, James was my biggest cheerleader. "You're going to disrupt the entire industry, Caroline," he would say proudly when I signed a new client. Then came a conversation that would change everything. My small company, which I had named Next Gen Solutions, was starting to require more of my time and attention. At the same time, James received a significant promotion at TechSphere that would involve longer hours and more travel. "What if I step back from my consulting position to focus on growing Next Gen?" I suggested one night over dinner. "With your new salary, we'll be financially secure and I can pour my energy into building something from the ground up." James loved the idea. "That's brilliant, Caroline. You've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And honestly, it would be helpful to have you managing things at home with my new schedule." That comment should have been my first warning sign, the assumption that stepping back from my consulting job meant I would be managing things at home. But I brushed it off, excited about the opportunity to focus on my company full-time. What James didn't fully understand, partly because I never fully explained it to him, was that I wasn't planning to become a housewife who dabbled in business on the side. I had a comprehensive business plan connections from my consulting days and a vision for creating a company that could compete with the big players in the industry, including TechSphere. I made a strategic decision not to make my role in the company too public initially. The tech industry was still overwhelmingly male-dominated, and I had seen firsthand how female founders were often not taken as seriously as their male counterparts. So I hired Marcus, a former colleague with an impressive presence, to be the face of the company while I pulled the strings behind the scenes as the strategy consultant. It was a decision born from practicality, not deception. At least that's what I told myself at the time. James knew I was working on growing NextGen, but he didn't know the extent of my involvement or the company's rapid growth. In his mind, I had a cute little business that kept me busy while he pursued his real career. And so began the dual life that would eventually lead to one of the most satisfying and heartbreaking days of my life. As James settled into his role as VP of Operations at TechSphere, I noticed subtle changes in his attitude toward me and my work. The man who had once admiringly called me brilliant now referred to my business as your little company or your project. At first, I thought I was being oversensitive, reading too much into casual comments. Our lives began to revolve increasingly around TechSphere and James's career. He started bringing home colleagues for dinner several nights a week, always with minimal notice. I would scramble to prepare impressive meals while simultaneously trying to finish important work for NextGen, which was growing faster than I had anticipated. Caroline, Robert, and Michael are coming for dinner tonight, he would announce at 3 p.m. as if I had nothing else planned for my day. Could you make that salmon dish they liked last time? During these dinners, James and his colleagues would dominate the conversation with talk of their achievements at work, barely acknowledging my presence except to compliment the food or ask for a drink refill. If I tried to contribute to the business discussion, James would often cut me off with a condescending smile. "Honey, this is pretty complex corporate strategy stuff," he would say, patting my hand. "Why don't you tell everyone about the new curtains you picked out for the living room?" The first time it happened, I was so shocked I couldn't respond. The second time I tried to stand my ground. "Actually, I was going to say that your approach to the Henderson account sounds similar to a strategy I implemented for a client last year. There might be some pitfalls you haven't considered." The table went silent. James's face flushed with embarrassment, not for himself, but for me. "Caroline has some experience from her consulting days," he explained to his colleagues, as if translating a foreign language. "Sweetie, things have changed a lot in the industry since then." But they hadn't. I was still very much plugged into the industry through my work with NextGen. In fact, I was developing cutting-edge solutions that would soon make some of TechSphere's products obsolete. But James didn't know that. To him, I was just playing at business while he did the real work. As James's star rose at TechSphere, he began forming a tight-knit group of executives who shared his increasingly arrogant worldview. There was Michael, the VP of Sales, with his perpetual smirk, David, the CFO, who spoke exclusively in condescending financial jargon, and Robert, the Chief Marketing Officer, who referred to his wife exclusively as the wife, as if she were an appliance rather than a person. Together, they formed a boys' club that celebrated a particularly toxic brand of corporate masculinity. They would come to our house for poker nights, filling the air with cigar smoke and stories of their business conquests, often speaking about female colleagues in ways that made me cringe. When I tried to discuss this shift with James, he dismissed my concerns entirely. "You're being too sensitive, Caroline. This is just how business works. If you were still in the corporate world, you'd understand." But I was in the business world deeper than he knew. NextGen had secured major clients, expanded its team to 30 employees, and was on track to double its revenue that year, all under my leadership with Marcus as the public face. The division between us grew wider. James began to make more pointed comments about my contribution to our household. "Must be nice to sleep in until 9 and spend the day on your hobbies," he remarked one morning as he rushed out the door at 7 a.m., not knowing I had been up until 3 a.m. finalizing a major client proposal. "Do you ever miss having a purpose?" he asked another time, as if running a growing technology company wasn't purpose enough. I began to feel like I was living with a stranger, someone who had forgotten who I was and what I was capable of. The man who had once been awed by my intelligence now seemed to pity me. It was confusing, infuriating, and deeply hurtful. What made it worse was that I was deliberately hiding a significant part of my life from him. My success was my secret, and sometimes I wondered if I had created this situation by not being transparent about NextGen's growth and my role in it. But each time I considered coming clean, James would make another dismissive comment that made me hold back. Why reveal my success to someone who had already decided I was a failure? While James was climbing the corporate ladder at TechSphere, I was building an empire. NextGen Solutions had evolved from a small startup operating out of my home office to a formidable player in the business software industry. Our project management platform, initially designed to fill gaps I had identified during my consulting years, had expanded into a comprehensive suite of business solutions. What had started with 2 programmers working weekends now comprised a team of over 100 talented professionals, developers, designers, salespeople, and support staff. We had offices in 3 cities, though I primarily worked from my private office downtown, which James believed was a small co-working space I used to get out of the house. The decision to use Marcus as the public face of NextGen had proven strategically sound, if ethically complicated. As a tall, silver-haired man with an authoritative voice and prestigious MBA, Marcus encountered none of the skepticism or patronizing attitudes I had faced as a young female entrepreneur. Investors wrote checks more readily. Clients signed contracts without the haggling I had experienced. Doors opened that had previously been closed. "It's not right that we have to do this," Marcus said to me once after a particularly successful investor meeting. "You should be getting the credit for all of this." "I get the results," I replied, though the arrangement sometimes left a bitter taste in my mouth. "That's what matters for now." Marcus knew he was essentially an actor playing a role. In reality, every major decision, every strategic pivot, every innovative feature came from me. The company's employees were divided into 2 groups: those who knew I was the true CEO and founder, and those who believed the corporate fiction that I was just a key strategic advisor. My core team, the first 20 employees who had been with us from the early days, knew the truth. They had signed NDAs about the company structure, and I trusted them implicitly. They understood the strategic reasons behind the unusual arrangement and were loyal to my vision. "Your husband still doesn't know," Lisa, my chief product officer and closest confidant at NextGen, asked one day over lunch. I shook my head. "He thinks it's a small business that keeps me busy between decorating the house and planning dinner parties." Lisa frowned. "Caroline, you're running a company valued at over $80 million. This isn't sustainable or healthy." She was right, of course. The deception had started as a practical business decision but had morphed into something more complicated when it came to my marriage. At first, I had planned to tell James once NextGen achieved certain milestones, but as his attitude toward me changed and his respect diminished, I found myself reluctant to share my success with him. There was also a part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, that enjoyed having this secret. In a marriage where I increasingly felt diminished, NextGen was the place where I was powerful, respected, and in control. What James didn't know was that NextGen had recently closed a round of funding that valued the company at just over $100 million. We had secured contracts with 5 Fortune 500 companies. Our software was being used by teams across the globe, and most significantly, we had begun preliminary talks about acquiring smaller competitors to expand our market share. One of those potential acquisitions was a division of TechSphere, James's employer. Our board had identified their project management division as underperforming, but with valuable client relationships and intellectual property that would complement our offerings. The potential acquisition was in the early discussion stages, with only top executives at TechSphere aware of the possibility. The irony wasn't lost on me. My little hobby business was in a position to acquire a portion of the company where my husband worked, the company he believed was so far superior to anything I could achieve. During this period of NextGen's growth, the board and I had been discussing the company's next phase. Marcus was approaching retirement age and had made it clear he didn't want to continue in his role indefinitely. Additionally, as we looked toward potentially going public in the next few years, questions of authentic leadership became more pressing. The market responds better to founder-led companies, our chief financial officer explained during a strategy session. Your story is compelling, Caroline, a woman who saw gaps in the market and built a better solution. That's the kind of leadership narrative that resonates with both customers and investors. After much discussion, the board had voted unanimously to transition me into the public role of CEO within the next 6 months. We had begun preparing the necessary press releases and transition plans. I had even started working with a PR consultant to craft my public image. The only person I hadn't figured out how to tell was my husband. Each time I considered revealing the truth to James, I imagined the conversation going poorly. Would he be angry about the deception? Would he be threatened by my success? Would he take credit for supporting me through it all, rewriting our history to cast himself as the magnanimous husband who enabled his wife's cute business venture? Or worse, would he simply not believe me? Had his image of me as his housewife diminished so completely that he wouldn't be able to reconcile it with the reality of who I truly was? As I grappled with these questions, the distance between us grew. We operated in parallel universes, his, where he was the successful provider, and I was his supportive wife, and mine, where I ran a thriving company and maintained a facade at home. Something would have to give, eventually. I just didn't expect it to happen so dramatically or so soon. The breaking point came on a crisp autumn evening. James had texted me mid-afternoon, inviting the executive team and their wives for dinner tonight. 7 sharp, making a big announcement. No, please. No asking if I had plans, just an assumption that I would be available to host his colleagues with 4 hours' notice. Normally, I would have rearranged my schedule, cancelled my meetings, and rushed home to prepare an impressive dinner. But that day, I had been finalising details for a major client implementation. The thought of dropping everything to play hostess to men who barely acknowledged my existence made something inside me harden. I called a catering company I had used for NextGen events and arranged for them to deliver and serve a gourmet dinner. It cost a small fortune for the last-minute service, but I could afford it. Not that James knew that. When I arrived home at 6:30, the caterers were setting up. James walked in minutes later and his expression shifted from surprise to displeasure. "What's all this?" he asked, gesturing to the uniformed staff arranging flowers and setting out appetizers. "You wanted dinner for the executive team." "This is dinner," I replied calmly. "I meant for you to cook. This looks impersonal." I raised an eyebrow. "You gave me 4 hours' notice to prepare dinner for 10 people. This was the solution." James's jaw tightened. "We'll discuss this later," he said, heading upstairs to change.